Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Knesset Israel. And we want to talk about today about the contradictions, to solve the contradictions of Jewish people being great in Torah and also being great in physical strength. Because the Gemara, the Talmud, has a lot of contradictions about this. When we last met our hero, some of the heroes of Annapolis' Knesset Israel under the leadership of Rabbi Moshe Weisblum Shita, people had pointed out the following. How can the Gemara in Sanhedrin say that immersing yourself in Torah weakens your physical strength? So one person who's in the room right now said, what do you do with King David? What do you do with King Shaul? What about General Yoav ben Saruya? There's a cast of stars, a real star search of people in the Torah who were tremendous in learning and tremendous in physical strength. And how can I have this Gemara telling me that it weakens? And we had started with Yaakov Avinu, our grandfather. Yaakov Avinu had just spent 14 years studying in the Yeshiva of Shem and Aver over there, and when he meets his wife, our grandmother Rachel, he's able to pop the boulder right off the well, which usually took quite a few men to do over there. So there's a lot of contradictions that we have to try to deal with over here. But of course, since we're Jewish, we have to make it worse first, right? Because Jewish people don't know how to answer questions directly. We make more questions and then we try to fix it. So a number of sources say that there are Gemaras that go against the Gemara in Sanhedrin. You have several places in Pirkei Avos where it says a lot of learning Torah makes you even healthier. And then you have another Gemara that says if you have a headache or this ache or that ache, learn Torah, it'll help you, it'll embolden you even more. And they just ask from all different sides of places where it seems to be Torah strengthens me, Torah doesn't weaken me. So everybody wants to know what's going on with all this. And just when we thought it couldn't get more complicated, we have a Gemara in Ksubis, a beautiful piece of Talmud about getting old and having a men's strength. Now this Gemara can be found in 3 places. 2 times in Talmud Bavli and 1 time in Talmud Yerushalmi. The thesis is as follows. If I conserve my energy and what I'm exposed to when I'm young, it can help me when I'm older. Now, the doctor will have to explain to us what kind of research this is about this. But in all these Gemaras, the common thread is all the rabbis, they're old, and they appear that they're physically weak and they have people helping them, but then it's found out that they have storages of unbelievable strength. Now, in the Bavli is very, very curt. In Talmud Yerushalmi, the rabbis are clearly telling the students, when you're young, don't overexpose yourself to extreme cold, extreme heat, extreme pressure. It's going to come back to hint you later. I had mentioned my Uncle Abi, an electrician, for years and years, pounding on his knees doing electric work. And as he got closer to 50, it started to hurt a lot. And Gil was able to tell us that there were changes in the United States military from certain positions they were doing with your knees. So now Gil's knees hurt, but the people who come after Gil, they're giving them knee pads. So there seems to be precedent for this Gemara. But let me share with you what this says here. And these are all people that are giants of Torah, and they seem to have very strange amounts of strength. Now right away everyone's going to say, I know, it was an adrenaline burst. I will just explain it all with an adrenaline burst. You can talk to Dr. Cummins about that and make your decisions, but you should just hear what happened. Rabbi Yochanan. Now Rabbi Yochanan was probably the greatest man of his time. He was the editor of Talmud Yerushalmi. He was a very, very handsome man. He was a descendant of Yosef, and he also was a very, very heavy fellow. He was a physically heavy fellow. And this is not allegorical, Lenny Bruce, because the Gemara in Bamitzia goes to great trouble to show that the man was physically heavy. I sat with a student Erev Shabbos. Now in Lancaster we try to be technically adept, so we carefully use the internet when we can. We typed in what we thought the rabbi's height and weight was. You all know. I mean, sometimes we ask our doctor if we want to get yelled at. I'm sure you don't yell at the patients, but I've had doctors give it to me. But there are websites you can type in your height and weight, and it'll tell you what to do with yourself. So
tell you how bad you are.
So the student and I sat there. And this particular student, he weighs a lot, and he's tall, but he's very muscular. We typed in his height and weight. The computer said would have thought of his help, and my dear student Tzvi had to control himself not to say expletives because the computer insulted him. But then it insulted me, and it was good. And then we typed in what the rabbi probably weighed and what height would have been. Then the computer almost exploded. So Rabbi Yochanan was not the picture of health when you meet him. He had a tough life also. 10 of his kids died, but back in the day, that premature death of children was very, very common. That goes all the way up into the 1800s. And there used to be special prayers in the Siddur Slichos for that also. So the young death of children was very, very common. But let's see what happened. Rabbi Yochanan was going up a ladder, and he had some assistants, Rabbi Ami and Ravasi. So he's getting older, and he's a heavy fellow, and he has these two assistants with him. So they're stepping along on the ladder. Now you got to think about this. This is almost no one here is old enough to know who Max Sennett is. Bruce, you don't know Max Sennett, no?
Not personally.
Keystone Cops. Max Sennett was an early comedy director of silent films. But this is almost right out of one of his old films over here. You have a very, very heavy man that weighs several hundred pounds, and you're going up a ladder with him and back of him. This is just looking for trouble over here. So they went under the ladder, they went up the ladder, and the ladder broke. And the two assistants went flying. The rabbi stuck out his arm. He put one arm over there. He grabbed him, and he grabbed him, and he saved him. And then he pulled him up. Now, I'm not really good with upper body strength, but you have to be pretty strong to do that. Even if you're in decent shape, that's, one arm here, one arm there, and lift, two adult men, whatever they weighed. They pulled him up. And the rabbi said to him, if you're that strong, what do you need us for? He says, well, I can't use up all my strength. I got to leave it for my old age. That's what he told him. Rabbi Bohu, who is his student, he was in a bathhouse. Now, the old-time bathhouses, probably nobody here had the displeasure of it. My father-in-law from the east side said the greatest pleasure in life when he was a kid was for your parents on a Sunday to take you to Coney Island to go to the baths. It was the greatest thing. They had baths also. That's before your time, Bruce. It's not? I thought you had indoor plumbing.
I've seen where they were. I don't think they were open when I saw.
Oh, they didn't admit no admittance to people named Bruce. Okay, all right, but there was a very, very pleasurable.
Bruce didn't want to go in.
An older fellow explained to me. We were making a contrast once about who enjoys Shabbos more. This generation, the generation before, the generation before. And this old fellow was explaining to me that before you had indoor plumbing, as disgusting as it sounds. And those of you who go to the Eastern Shore a lot are probably going to tell me, well, you should go to Tillman Island, go look for indoor plumbing. Good luck to you. So I don't know people who have been there. I've heard a lot of stories about this. I one time was on Tillman Island. If you turn down the wrong street, you need to have a car that moves quickly, no matter what religion you are. But he was explaining to me that it used to be you didn't have indoor hot plumbing, you didn't have good indoor plumbing. Earl was laughing because he remembers this. So, and then it would be his Erev Shabbos, when you would come to the schwitz and to get the really good bath. He says it was out of this world because you were filthy and you had worked all week, you didn't have a good shower, some places had cold, they didn't have hot, and he said it was almost a religious experience going to the baths over there to get cleaned up for Shabbos because you were dirty a whole week. And they were just contracting, so we take a shower all the time so we don't get so excited, and if you didn't do it behind your ears, your mother gets you anyway. But he just explained to me the whole essence of these public baths. You should know in Baltimore, they had public baths until 1936-37. They still had them. And, now I don't know about Annapolis, in Baltimore there are Jewish and Italian families All right, the Horowitzes and the Sopranos, they go way back together, and historians will tell you, the Jewish Museum of Baltimore did a write-up on this. It's because the Jews and Italians were in similar neighborhoods, and they would meet together at the bathhouses, and many long-term friendships were met over there. I know Tony Bennett had a lot of Jewish friends. He used to go to a Jewish friend for Friday night dinner. But a lot of interesting friendships were molded. But let me tell you what I'm getting at. The old bathhouses were extremely dangerous because there were boilers under the floor, there was humidity all over the place, and they had accidents. They had bad accidents. They had people die accidents. So there's even a tefillah, there's a prayer that the Gemara in Brachos has to say when you go to the bathhouse and make it out in one piece with more than just your towel. It was a real problem. If you know anything about construction, which I only know this much, you know that whenever too much moisture can get in, you're in trouble. That's why bridges always have problems. So anyway, Rabbi Bahu was there one day, and he also had some attendants, and it was one of those days. Squeak, squeak, crash! The floor goes in, everybody's going down. He found something to grab onto, and maybe when you're a kid, you had the game Monkeys in the Barrel. Nothing racist. It's a real game. Monkeys in the Barrel. It was. I don't know if they have these things in Israel, Rabbi. These little plastic monkeys with curved arms, and it's like a skill. It's you hook one into the other, and you make a chain. It's a kid's game, nice kid's game, very nice for Shabbos. The rabbi did that. The Gemara says in Brachos, he grabbed onto something. He grabbed the person, and he grabbed the person, he grabbed the person. Before they were done, they had a chain, right out of the movies. And the rabbi had the strength to go, pull himself up, saved everybody in the chain. How many people in the chain? We don't know. But whatever it was pretty good. And they asked him the same question. Rabbi, what do you need us to be your attendants for if you could do this? And he said the same thing. I save up energy for my old age. All right, so the bottom line is that regardless of the Gemara Sanhedrin giving us a hard time about Torah weakening your strength, we have a long list of sources that say it can make you healthier and stronger, and these rabbis that seem to do pretty well. So I'm going to try to take the easy way out, and then I'm going to knock it away. There was a rabbi named Rabbi Shaul Nathanson, and he's a Sefer Divrei Shaul. So he says, no. The Gemara in Sanhedrin, it's not saying Torah makes you weak and it makes your muscles go limp, like in the old Popeye cartoons before he eats the spinach. No, it's like this. A person who's very strong usually thinks, I am strong because I make myself strong, because of all the different things I do to make myself strong. And then a person learns Torah, and the Torah shows us more and more and more that, all right, you get some credit, but you got to give Hashem a lot of credit. So he says, read it like this. When the Gemara Sanhedrin says Torah weakens the strength of a man, it doesn't mean learning Torah, blah. No. It means that I come in thinking it's my strength, and the more Torah you learn, you find out it's not your strength, it's God's strength. So it's all a matter of talking. It doesn't mean you physically get weaker. It means the more Torah you learn, you find out it's not your kayach, it's Hashem's kayach. So he says it's all about etymology. That the more Torah you learn, you realize you thought that was your kayach. It's not just your kayach. It's God-given kayach, God-helping kayach, and it weakens your idea that you think it's all from you, that it's not from God. Very nice answer. That was the one you liked. But you taught me how to be cynical. So therefore, there are other rabbis like this one, the Pardes Yosef, who bomb away and they say, sorry, Rabbi Nathanson, close, but no cigar. Because we have another piece of Talmud that goes against it, and this is my segue into Zisha Breitbart. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, everybody knows. He is quote-unquote the Jewish cave rabbi. He is the one that we talk about in Lag BaOmer. He was hiding from the Romans in a cave with his son studying for 12 years. Now, his son, Rabbi Eliezer, was in there with him. Now, this Rabbi Eliezer is a very, very colorful fellow. In Gemara B'Metzia, he becomes a detective for the government, and he arrests Jews. And boy, does he make enemies. When he dies, he tells his Rebbetzin, don't bury me after I die. I got rabbis that hate my guts because I arrested their cousins. So I mean, he's a very, very colorful person, a very, very heavy person. The Mara lists them also in the heavyweights. And of course, one of my dear students, the one I quoted to Yehuda last time, said, is that rabbi in the Guinness Book of World Records? Because this boy basically impressed on me that the Torah can't argue with the Guinness Book of World Records. The other students are trying to explain to him that might not be true. And he's almost there. He's almost there. But this rabbi would have some of those people in their beat. But he's a very colorful fellow because in Gemara B'Metzia, he's very, very, very heavy. There were some health issues. Not the picture of health at all. Tremendous in Torah, tremendous in detective work. And that is why David became a detective, although David exercises more, so he stays slim and trim, not like Rabbi Eliezer, but he's working on his Torah skills, too, which may make you fat. We're going to see. There is a clandestine Gemara in Shir Hashirim Rabbah. It says like this, when Rabbi Eliezer, now we don't know exactly what age he was. When he was young, he was extremely strong, not normal, not normal strong. Like I always say to you, he didn't have a six-pack, he had a double dozen pack. Abnormally strong, you'll see in a second. His mother would bake pita, and he would sit there, she'd bake one, he'd eat it. She'd bake one, he'd eat it. Because he had great strength, and you know, sometimes you can be very strong, you still have to eat a lot. You don't, if you exercise enough, you don't get fat, but it feeds your strength. That's what it did for him. 2 donkey peddlers come along, and they see him, and they said, why don't you leave something for everybody else? There's going to be a famine in the world the way you eat, boy. He didn't say anything. But as my father, whose yard site was last week, said, don't get mad, get even. So he did. The 2 donkey drivers walked away for a little bit, and Eliezer picked up the loaded donkey and walked each one of the donkeys and stuck it on the roof. Now, I spoke with a professional weightlifter, and he said, even the professional guys in the Olympics, that is this properly distributed weight. Mm-hmm. Lifting a donkey, which is stubborn anyway, and stubborn as a you-know-what, we're in a shoal, a loaded donkey, and he did it 2 times.
It's kicking and stomping.
Right. The guys come back, and they go, oh, this is great. Now you're about to see gorgeous parenting skills over here for every younger children in your life. Grandparents. Donkey drivers come back, they figure out something's going on, they go over to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, they said, Rabbi, we think your son stuck our donkeys on the roof. Now we don't even know how old he was at this point. Rabbi Eliezer, wasn't rabbi yet probably, was quiet. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, now this is a great parenting thing, if you don't need it, pass on to somebody else. Said, here he is. Stuck the donkeys on a roof. The donkey drivers are flipping out. Kids there quiet. This huge kid. If you watch Flintstones when you were a kid, it's like Bam Bam. Yeah, right. Oh, they had that? Yeah, okay. The rabbi looks at the donkey drivers and says, what did you say to my child that made him do that? What a great line! I gotta re-raise my kids. I have grandkids. It was a great line. You know, your kid does something horrendous, uses his strength for wild things. What did you do to my child to invoke this? That's a parent. Did you give a lecture on that? Effective parenting? Okay, you have to give it again. All right, anyway. So they told him, and the rabbi said, the God that gave my son the strength will send enough pita for him, me, you, and everybody else. Don't talk to my son like that. Eliezer, please bring down the donkeys. Yes, Mom. Goes up there, and the Gemara says this time, he's a little emboldened, carries them both down at once. As David Copperfield, the magician, says, boys and girls, don't try this at home. So he comes down, and someone in the group says, you know, you're so strong. Can't you put some of this somehow towards Torah? You're just amazing. So he thinks about it. Says, I'll give it a shot. But the Gemara says, as he became more engrossed in Torah, so he wasn't exercising, I don't know what he's doing with his eating habits, he's sitting and learning, and he became now we all know, if you ever seen pictures of ex-weightlifters or ex-boxers, if you don't exercise and watch yourself, what happens to the muscles?
Turns to fat.
Turns into fat and flab. And that's what happened to him. The Gemara says he switched from being all muscle to turning into very, very fatty, as he is in Gemara Matzia. And the Gemara says he became so weak that when he got older, just flipping the talus on top of his head was a pain in the neck. That's how weak he got. Now, when I saw the business with the donkey to the roof, I got a really big kick out of that, because the Zisha Breitbart, this Jewish strongman that my Rebbe used to speak about, and it's amazing how he died, one of his feats was he would climb up a ladder. In one arm he had a baby elephant. It's documented all over the place that people saw it. He had a baby elephant in one arm, and he went up the ladder, and in his teeth he had a train wheel, and he had people dangling from the train wheel. Not normal, not normal. I went to an expert to try to give me a scientific explanation of all this. If it wasn't documented, you would just say it's completely ridiculous. But when I saw that this rabbi walked down carrying donkeys, and I saw Zisha Breitbart with the baby elephant, that's all. When I read about it, it was very amazing. The mighty Adam, though, they do have videos about his feats. But my Rebbe, the reason Rabbi Schneider, that's all, just real quick, had mentioned Zisha Breitbart, is he said, boys, don't ever get carried away with your strength, because he told us about Zisha Breitbart, and my handout there, if you want to look later, it has a list of things that are documented that he was able to do. Very, very frightening things. My Rebbe said, though, he died young. How did he die? There is a part of his act, with his bare hands, he would take a railroad spike, and with his bare hands, drive it into something. He had done it so many times that one time, when you do something a lot, you don't always watch yourself. He missed, he drove it into his leg. And in those days, you didn't have a tetanus shot yet, because this is going back to the turn of the century. Didn't have a tetanus shot. Doctors operated on him, I think, 10 times, and they couldn't deal with it. So, when we were all little and we got the tetanus shot, we complain, but it saves your life. In Lancaster, we have boys dealing with, stepping on nails sometimes. We got to make sure the boys have their tetanus shot. But in those days, there was no tetanus shot. So, and it wasn't just the tear going through, it was because there was rust on it. So back at the turn of the century, before you had all your correct medicines, he died from that. So my Rebbe said, it was just amazing. Here was this man that was unreal powerful, and a piece of metal did him in. So our Rebbe just said to us, guys, God bless you, be strong, make your people proud of you, but don't ever get carried away. So that just made me think of that. All right, but now we have to try to pull all this together. All right, so how are we going to handle? You have all these contradictions. Torah gives you strength, it takes away strength, doesn't, this, that. What are we going to do? We have to be able to deal with it. The other fellow I mentioned, the mighty Adam, Yossel Greenstein, if you really, really want to learn about him, I heard about him from my Rebbe. In York, Pennsylvania, there's a company called York Barbell. You heard of it?
Oh, yeah.
Now, the way you're there, just go on 83 North. You have to go further than I do. And they have a Samson guy in the weightlifting suit. He's twirling around and he's lifting the old-fashioned barbells. York, Pennsylvania. It's an hour drive for me. I don't know what it would be for you. But they have a weightlifting Hall of Fame. And when you go into the weightlifting Hall of Fame, the first room is dedicated to Yossel Greenstein, the mighty Adam, and the documentation is in Yiddish, because it has newspapers from way back in the day of him doing all his feats, and it's all in Yiddish, because he was a religious guy back in the day. And the scary thing is they have there from the York County Fair, they have horseshoes that he mangled by hand, and they have very thick nails that he busted with his teeth. Very neat person. Like, again, if my Rebbe hadn't known the man and seen him, I wouldn't even waste your time with it, but there seems to be a lot of documentation on this fellow. And he was supposed to be a person who learned a lot of Torah. Not as much as Rabbi Eliezer, but to do what he did at 82. And if you look on the internet at pictures of him, he was 5'2", but like this, okay? But they do say about him, he was a shul-going fellow, and he is supposed to have studied plenty of Torah. But what you see is, they all observe is his forearms are not normal. He's pumped up, but there's something. Any picture you see of this Dr. Greenstein, and they call him Dr. Greenstein, the forearms are formed not like a regular person. I mean,
like Popeye, huh? Like Popeye.
Some of the in his 80s, he was like the interviewer went to visit him. He didn't live in such a good neighborhood, but the Greenstein said, "Let me walk you to your car." And the guy was old enough to be his 80. And then he realized, I better let this strong old man walk me to my car. And he was okay. So we have to deal with all this. So there's a Sefer Pardes Yosef from, let me get his name, brilliant man. I felt like an absolute fool. His name was Yosef Pansen. How would you pronounce that without breaking your teeth? Yosef?
Pansansky.
Okay. See, you got to be in the right places. That's the other alley. It took me 2 weeks to dig up all the sources. I look in this rabbi in one paragraph, got the whole thing. So he must have been something. I don't think it took him 2 weeks to do that. He says this is how it works. Torah works a little bit like certain medicines. Now the doctor will tell you. Now I don't know where our local doctor's holding on this. There are doctors that will tell you, don't take an antibiotic unless you really need to take the antibiotic, because many doctors will, and doctor, interrupt and tell us your opinion if you feel the need. There are doctors that will tell you antibiotics are there to cure what's wrong with you. But if you don't really need it and you're more to the healthy side, then the flora and fauna of your kishkas, there are all kinds of bacteria that you do need. And if the antibiotics enter when you don't really need them, they're going to go after the healthy things in you instead of the sickness. You want to amend anything to that?
Well, if you give me a chance, I'll. Sure. I have two things. Oh, you finish first, then I'll make two comments.
But you're an expert on that.
No,
recently a doctor lectured me on
right,
this.
You're absolutely right, because that argument's been going on for not just 1 year, but as long as modern medicine, since antibiotics.
Oh, okay. Dr. Neil Blacksburg just gave it to me over the head of it. And after he gave me the lecture, he said, "Oh, by the way, but if your primary care physician said to take it, go ahead and take it."
Of course.
Okay.
That's the same as like whatever the halacha is. Yeah. Check with your local rabbi before you.
Right. This fellow was a doctor.
That's the halacha caveat.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So he says like this. He goes, Torah, great Torah learning can do different things. Except this works a little bit different than medicine. Torah medicine works like this. If your body is basically in good shape, Torah can act as a vitamin to strengthen you in multiple ways. That's if you're in good shape. And that's why you can find people in the Torah, you can find people in the Gemara that were able to become healthy and get terrific strength with the Torah helping them. But that's if you're in decent shape, and this is actually the opposite of the antibiotics, but you'll see what I mean in a second. However, if you have some other problems, and the Gemara in Beitza says, Jewish people have a problem that we're audacious, we're azen, we have a national fierceness. So if inside of you have a lot of midos, a lot of character traits that are very, very fiery, when the Torah comes into you, the Torah will go after those sicknesses. And since the Torah is busy going after those sicknesses, it can act as a vitamin, so your regular physique, if you don't watch it, as Bruce said, with proper diet and exercise, the rest of the body is going to go. The Torah won't be able to enrich it. So if you take somebody like, let's take King Saul. So King Saul was basically a pretty good fellow. He made some mistakes, but he was basically a pretty good fellow. He was in good shape to start off with. Tremendous in Torah. So his Torah would have benefited him. It would have gone into vitamin mode. Same thing for King David. Same thing for some of the rabbis in the Gemara. However, as my friend Mike Friedman points out, see, the Friedmans are taking over with the Klingons. Rabbi Eliezer, he had a problem. There was a fear streak to him. You may remember when Rabbi Weisblum taught you about what happened when he came out of the cave with his father. All they'd been doing was studying Torah for 12 years. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he was tolerant and understanding that people had to work for a living. Eliezer was not. He was the one that looked at people and wanted to burn them, whatever happened over there, and his father had to settle him down. In Gemara B'Metzia also, by one of his arrests, there was a dry cleaner that mouthed off to him, and the rabbi arrested him and had regrets afterwards. Turned out the guy was a major offender anyway, but as my friend Michael Friedman explained with this, Rabbi Eliezer did have a fierce side to him. So when he learned Torah, his intense Torah was busy trying to cool down the fierceness in him. And the Gemara in Be'ah says Jews do have a certain amount of fierceness and audaciousness. We needed to stand our ground when the time is right. But for him, the Torah really couldn't be much of a vitamin. It was busy combating that fierceness in his personality that could get him and others in trouble. And since the Torah couldn't be his vitamin, it wasn't there to enrich his body. And therefore, once he stopped doing exercises and lifting, 2 donkeys a day, so then his body just did what a body is going to do if you don't exercise and have proper diet. But he says that. But there are other people, though, that if you're basically in good shape and the Torah can come into you, and it doesn't have to fight things that are wrong with you, then the Torah can enrich you and even make somebody even stronger. So he really says you have to analyze each personality and then determine if the Torah is going to be a vitamin, if it's going to combat sicknesses within the person. And he says if you go through each case, it pretty much evens out most of the contradictions. Doctor.
Actually, you raised a couple of good questions. This is not directly, it perplexed me. Many, if not the most, of the Jews who came here from Europe in the, let's say, the first half of the 20th century, did not have feelings of audacity. It was just the opposite. I don't mean to change the topic a little bit, but you made such a point out of this in your last few minutes. How do you explain that? I mean, there are some, there are a few, those are the odd ones. Most of the families who came here tried to blend into the landscape.
Right, and a lot of them assimilated, right.
No, I'm not talking assimilation. But
No, they wanted to be Americans in whatever way they wanted to.
No, they wanted to get away from. So are you saying this, if you're applying this to one point in time, that's one thing. But if you're saying that Jews, all of us, have feelings of, I don't know, excessive courage or audacity, which was your word, I don't know.
I'm going to take the audacity further than the courage. Right.
And does the strength follow up on that? I don't know. Anyway, handle that one.
The Paris Yosef, I can't pronounce his last name. So he wants to say that depending on the Torah learning of the person, that all has to balance out with the kind of audacity they have in them or not. He has some people, they have these streaks in them, and the Torah is supposed to tone it down or at least guide them. Because the Gemara in Beitza says, the Talmud says, if Jews wouldn't have any Torah at all, we could get so rambunctious and audacious that we would just make trouble all over the world. Some writers say this explains why very often Jews are at the front of a lot of rebellions, be they good or bad. They want to attribute it to that.
All right.
But then really what has to be done is we really would have to define what exactly this audacious is and how is it used in a positive and negative way. And then there's a lot of Jews we can study on that.
I can see that
my father is part of all
Torah
this.
study can focus your strength so that you could do whatever, crack 3 bricks or whatever. But you remind me, pardon this analogy, you remind me of Peter Ustinov. You remember?
Sure.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Most of the people here are of an age. Great actor, okay? He made a movie probably 30, 40 years ago called We're No Angels. And in that movie, he's a safecracker. He's a crook, but a good crook, good-natured crook. And he tries, other people try to break into safes and, use guns and hammers and knives and they can't do it. But he comes along and he feels, whether it's a paper suitcase or a steel safe, he feels it, he touches it, he concentrates, and then he goes, and the thing opens up. It's beautiful. It happens like 3 or 4 times in the movie. That, to me, is the kind of focused strength that you're saying that Torah gives you.
Yeah, my weightlifter buddy had used some of that when he was explaining to me about these other fellows that have the handouts about. But we really need to go to, I'll tell you, what you brought up with turn of the century. There are accounts written by non-Jewish teachers about their opinion of Jewish children, immigrants from the East Side back in the day. Observations they had about their personalities. So I have to bring that in because that deals with some of what you're talking about how pushy they should be, not pushy they should be, and differences they found in Jewish kids versus the regular ones. One thing they noticed, and all the non-Jewish teachers said this back in the day, they said Jewish kids tend to ask a lot more questions than the ones that they had. That really, we could have an exhaustive study of the people from the East Side. One of the champions, I don't know if anyone here ever heard of Rosa Schneiderman. Our lives are touched by Rosa Schneiderman. Rosa Schneiderman, she should rest in peace, was around this big. And she was from an Orthodox family. She had red hair. And she was one of the greatest warriorettes for rights in the workplace. So if you Google her name, you'll find a lot about it. And she fought for things, and people were astonished because she was this tiny, tiny little Jewish Russian girl, and she would give these orations in Yiddish and fire people up to fight their bosses for bosses' rights and unions. And there was another one, Clara Lemlach, who definitely was no Lemel. She also was a very, very slight Jewish girl. And this isn't back, I don't know if you want this, but anyway, there were Jewish bosses who paid Jewish thugs to beat the living daylights out of her for challenging the bosses, and they broke her bones. And the police did nothing, and she showed up again the next day from the hospital and made trouble again. So there's a whole mix. So a study of the early immigrants would be very, 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 very interesting. My own father, for a while, was a victim but then his audacious just came out later. So we'll have to see if I inherit it. All right, there's a lot to think about. But Doc, is there anything else you want to tell us about the antibiotics? Since I grew up, take them.
No.
What's the truth?
The truth is we don't know. We know squat. You've heard both opinions. Take them, don't take them. We don't know. My opinion is take it if you have the appropriate illness or indication.
Doc, I had one student, God bless him, he's married now with kids, he grew up. When this child would get an earache, his parents only did homeopathic. They would not give him amoxicillin. And I went to visit this child writhing in pain for days, and I said, "What's Mom doing for you?" She put a drop of honey in my ear, laid me in a pillow, and said, "Don't drink milk for a week."
And he got better.
Kids suffered a lot on the way there.
All right, let me ask you this. You mentioned tetanus. How many, if we did not get tetanus shots, how many of us would get tetanus in our lifetime?
That's what you're here for.
Very few. But
How
does
come?
that mean you shouldn't take tetanus shots? Absolutely not. I mean, I advocate it for everybody. So, if you want to make an analogy for antibiotics, it's there. There is a difference in nature between vaccination and prophylaxis and treatment, such as an antibiotic. But we don't need to.
I just read so much about people from the turn of the century dying from slight little cuts and slight little infections. It's just amazing. It's amazing we're here.
Absolutely.
Oh, so keep the tetanus shot. So anyway, so on behalf of the Shul and Lancaster Yeshiva, we thank everyone much for participating.
Thank you.
Drink more, eat more, and we wish the best to Rabbi Singer.